I've been to over 30 countries in the last couple of years, and this is what I've learned on my trips. The first and foremost thing I think a lot of people underestimate is how similar we all are. Like, it's so insane how similar every human being around the world is. And it's actually a bit frightening sometimes to think about how our governments and in general how our perception of each other is so morphed into something that is based on fear, even though we're all very similar. All the other things that we seem to want and culture and whatever, all of these things, obviously it's like unique to every country, but the main thing that all of us want is to be accepted, to be loved, to have a relationship, to have family, to have friends, to have a relationship. And one common trait that we all seem to share is that we all want to protect our families. The second thing that I realized with traveling is that traveling is actually not as difficult as I thought before I traveled. And it's actually also not that difficult to get to places if you really want to go there, and also have it be very cheap. I think a lot of people have the idea that you either have to be a backpacker that goes to Thailand or something and sleeps in a hostel for 10 euros a night, or you go to a very luxurious like 5-star hotel and you live that kind of lifestyle. But it's actually not that difficult to travel to, let's say, fancy places like the Maldives, for example, if you know how to travel there. Example, when I tell people that I went to the Maldives, they assume that it must have cost like thousands and thousands of euros, which it can if you go to one of these like Hilton resorts on the water, like these houses on top of the water. But this is not a actual local experience because the locals do not live on these resorts and on these islands. I went to an island called Toto, and even though there were a lot of tourists, there were also a lot of locals. And this is actually how I like to experience the country, even though the Maldives is known for its beaches and its luxurious lifestyle, whatever. I think actually experiencing like the locals and how they like perceive their country is way more valuable than just going to a resort that costs thousands and thousands of euros. It can be very nice, obviously, like if you want to go on honeymoon or something like that, which I understand. But if you just want to travel to a place, or if you want to see as many places as possible, there's a way and there's a budget how you can basically do that. The third thing that I really realized with traveling is that people are actually very willing to help and very friendly and very approachable if you just go up to them and just try to talk to them. I think it depends on where you are, because if you're in the West, if you're in Europe, for example, it's a bit more cold, like the culture is more cold, so people will not just randomly come up to you and talk to you or something. But even here in the Netherlands where I live, if you go up to someone, they might get a bit like startled at first, but once you start talking to them, it's actually fine. And I think this is a very interesting thing that I notice around the world, that if you actually go up to people and if you travel, especially if you travel by yourself, because then you're also more approachable yourself, a lot of people are very willing to help you or to show you around, or people don't always want something from you or don't always want to scam you or something. But that happens as well, so be aware of that. The fourth thing would be that once you start traveling, everything feels very close by, and it doesn't feel as far as before you travel. Because for me to go to India, which is like 8 hours from here, doesn't feel like 8 hours. It feels like I'm going to Spain or something, which is like 2 hours away. But it's not about time specifically, but in essence, your whole idea of how big the world is becomes smaller and it becomes more congested in a sense. So places don't feel very far or very unfamiliar anymore. Places feel like any other place, but just a bit further away, if that makes sense. And I've heard this from other travelers as well. It's a very common experience that the more you travel, the smaller the world starts to feel, and the more the world starts to feel as one big home or something. So yeah, that's also something to look out for. The fifth thing, and honestly it does depend if you're a boy or a girl, it makes a difference. But if you meet people over social media that you haven't met before maybe, but they seem reliable, most of the time they're actually like pretty fine to hang out with once you go to a specific place. And it's actually very nice to know someone everywhere, basically. I've met some of the greatest people in my life through social media that I didn't know before. And some have become like literally my best friends that I like to go visit once in a while when I get the opportunity to travel. But meeting people online is actually a very good way to make friends in a country. And once you're in a country, it's obviously way nicer to travel with a local, because they know exactly what to do, where to go, where to eat. And my 6 points also, and this also I guess is connected to this, don't be afraid to try new food and try new experiences when you're in a different country. I think a lot of people go to countries and then live the same way that they live in their country. But what's the point of traveling if you're literally going to stay in your hotel, or you're just going to stay in like cafes or something like that? I think it's very important to experience local culture if you're there. You don't have to overdo it, obviously, and you don't have to like go on like crazy adventures, but at least try to do some local things or try to see some things that you would not normally feel comfortable with doing. As long as you stay safe, that's very important as well. I mean, traveling to a place that you don't know can obviously be a bit like frightening, and also safety wise, it can be very different from where you're from. But I do think that there's a certain way that you can guarantee that you do not end up in these kind of situations, and that's just to be aware. And this is the same in every country, also your own country. Everywhere that you are in the world, there's just like you don't go out after a certain time. You don't go out by yourself in like deserted like streets or something like this. So as long as you use your head, and as long as you don't do stuff that you wouldn't do in your country in terms of safety, then you should be fine. In general, it's good to understand that there's a whole wide world that you can travel to, and there's a lot of different places that you can visit. Obviously, there's a matter of money, and it's not always easy to just like travel if you don't have the money. But I do think that in this digital age, there's always a way to earn money, whether that be like with social media marketing or something like this, or maybe you do like UGC for companies or something like this, and you can travel to those countries. And sometimes there's also visas, if you're from Europe, for example, for Australia and stuff like that, to explore and to, I don't know, experience it for yourself before you move there, maybe potentially. I do understand that sometimes if you're from a country that has like a weak passport, it is a lot more difficult to travel, but also don't forget that you can still travel inside of your own country. And there's probably a lot of things in your own country that you haven't seen yet. So try to travel in your own country as well. That's very important. And just keep an open mind when you travel. I think it's very important to understand that you're a guest in a country and you should behave like a guest as well. Don't overstay like the hospitality of the country, or don't impose like your way of thinking in a country. I've seen people like this as well, that literally go to Bali or something, for example, and then they are rude to like the locals, and they like laugh at the locals and stuff like that. And I just think that says a lot about the person, and it's just like ridiculous, to be honest. But there's people like this as well. But yeah, there's a whole wide world out there to travel, so go travel, and I hope you have safe travels and enjoy exploring the world.